Have you ever noticed that the more you grow, the more alone you feel? The deeper you work on yourself, the stranger your own world becomes. You look at your family and they whisper, "What happened to you?" Your friends stop inviting you out as if your presence has become unsettling. And sometimes the person lying next to you in bed says the words that sting the most. "You've changed." But what if that accusation is not a sign of failure? What if it's proof you on the right path? Carl Jung, the father of depth psychology, made a shocking observation. He saw that real spiritual growth doesn't strengthen your relationships. It destroys them first. Not out of cruelty, not because you're doing something wrong, but because transformation tears away the false bonds that once held you together. It's only after this destruction that something real has the chance to be born. Jung himself lived through this crucible. In 1913, during the most intense period of his psychological work, his wife Emma confided to a friend, "Carl has become a stranger. He sits at dinner, but isn't here. He looks at me, but doesn't see me." His children walked around their own home, as if stepping on glass. His colleagues whispered he was unstable. To everyone around him, Jung's transformation looked like abandonment. And yet, Jung was more present to himself than he had ever been. What was really happening? He was breaking something called the participation mystique, the unconscious fusion that ties families, friendships, and marriages together. And that same breaking is happening in your life right now, whether you've named it or not. Before we go deeper, pause for a second. If you have ever been told you've changed by people who once loved you, subscribe to this channel and share your story in the comments. Your experience isn't just personal, it's universal. And together, we're going to uncover why your growth feels like destruction and which relationships are meant to survive it. Here's the truth most people never see. Most of your relationships are not built on who you really are. They are built on unconscious agreements about who you pretend to be. Your family has assigned you a role, the responsible one, the troublemaker, the funny one, the caretaker. Your friends hold an image of you, the loyal one, the adventurous one, the safe one who never changes. Your partner depends on you for something that often has little to do with your true self, maybe emotional support, maybe financial stability, maybe simply distraction from their own emptiness. These dynamics are not chosen consciously. They are fusions, silent contracts where everyone's psyche entangles with everyone else's. It feels like love, it feels like connection, but in reality, it's often codependence. Dr. Murray Bowen's research on family systems proved this decades after Jung. He found that families function as emotional units, where the individual who begins to differentiate, to become authentic, triggers anxiety across the entire system. And here's the biological catch. Our nervous systems are addicted to this unconscious fusion. Neuroscience reveals that social connection activates the same brain circuits as pain relief, which means when you start to break away from false roles, people feel it as if you've ripped away their medication. They experience withdrawal, and they blame you for it. This is why your growth feels like destruction. It's not random. It's not chaos. It's the natural consequence of breaking fusions that never allowed you to be fully alive in the first place. Jung captured it in a letter to a patient in 1916. The pain your family feels at your transformation is not caused by you becoming yourself. It is caused by them losing the version of you that allowed them to remain unconscious. When you start waking up, the system around you shakes. That's not betrayal. It's the first crack in the wall of illusion. And only through that breaking can something real emerge. This breaking doesn't just create distance. It reveals patterns, 3 of them, that Jung identified again and again in his patients. Recognizing these patterns can save you years of guilt and confusion because once you see them, you'll understand. It was never about you doing something wrong. It was about the invisible contracts finally collapsing. The first pattern is the projector. These are the people who unconsciously use you to carry the life they never lived. Maybe your parent wanted to be an artist, so they pushed you toward creativity, not because they loved your path, but because you were living the dream they abandoned. But the moment you take ownership of your life on your own terms, their projection shatters. They feel betrayed. They confuse your independence with rejection. The second pattern is the guardian. These are the ones who need you to stay asleep so they don't have to face their own darkness. A partner who married you because you were predictable may suddenly feel threatened when you start exploring spirituality, creativity, or emotional depth. They'll sabotage your growth, not out of hatred but out of fear, because your awakening forces them to see what they've been avoiding in themselves. The third pattern is the mirror. Sometimes you don't need to say a word. Just your presence unsettles people. Why? Because your clarity reflects their blindness. You become a mirror of everything they don't want to see. This isn't judgment, it's resonance, and often it drives people away without explanation. Each of these patterns shows up differently, but they share one truth. Your growth disrupts the roles, projections, and illusions others rely on to feel safe. And when that safety collapses, they see you as the cause. But the truth is, you've simply stopped pretending. Pause here for a moment. If you've ever had someone accuse you of changing when you were finally becoming real, subscribe and leave a comment below saying, "They sensed the shift before I spoke it." Because you're not alone. This is the path Jung mapped for all of us. Let's dive deeper into the first pattern, the projector. Jung treated countless patients who lived under the shadow of someone else's unlived life. One case was Anna, a woman whose mother hadn't spoken to her in months. Why? Because Anna had begun painting again. It sounds harmless, even beautiful. But to her mother, it was betrayal. When Anna was young, her mother had given up her own artistic dreams to fit the mold of wife and mother. She projected that abandoned self onto Anna. Every sketch, every brushstroke Anna made as a child was worshipped, not for Anna's sake, but because her mother was vicariously painting through her. But Anna grew up, chose a stable career, and set aside art for decades. When she returned to it on her own terms, her mother's projection collapsed. The mother could no longer use Anna as her substitute life, and so she responded with rejection. This is the painful truth of projection. It isn't conscious. People don't say, "I'll use you to live the life I never had." It happens silently, deep in the psyche. And when your growth forces them to face their own abandoned self, they can't handle the grief. They lash out at you because you've stopped carrying what wasn't yours to begin with. You probably know someone like this. The friend who resents your success because it highlights the risks they never took. The parent who criticizes your choices because it forces them to see their own compromises. The key is this. You can't fix a projector by explaining yourself. You can't defend your choices into their acceptance. Projection is unconscious. They literally cannot see it. Your job is to notice the pattern, hold your boundaries, and release the guilt. Now let's turn to the second pattern, the guardian. If projectors need you to carry their unlived life, guardians need you to stay unconscious. They rely on the unspoken agreement that you won't change, because your stability protects them from their own instability. Jung saw this in countless marriages. A husband begins therapy after a health crisis. He becomes more emotional, more curious, more spiritual. His wife reacts with hostility. "I married a rational man. I don't recognize you anymore." What's really happening? She chose him because he was shut down, because his lack of emotional depth allowed her to avoid her own. His transformation wasn't just about him, it exposed what she'd been hiding from herself. Guardians often escalate when threatened. They pick fights, sabotage your progress, or threaten to leave if you don't go back to normal. Dr. Harriet Lerner documented this in her research. Nearly half of couples where one person began deep personal work ended up in crisis because the other could not tolerate the change. The hardest truth about guardians is this: Sometimes your growth destroys the very foundation the relationship was built on. If the partnership was created to avoid growth, then the moment you evolve, the agreement collapses. But there is a way through: transparency. The only ethical path is to say clearly, "I am changing because I am becoming who I really am. I'd love for you to join me, but I won't abandon myself to keep things as they were." Some guardians rise to the invitation. Many do not. And when they don't, the relationship has to end, because to stay means betraying yourself. Now, the third pattern, the mirror. This one is the most subtle and also the most lonely. It isn't projection, it isn't sabotage, it's simply incompatibility of depth. Jung once described attending a dinner party where everything was perfect: good food, pleasant conversation, polite people. Yet he felt profoundly alone. Why? Because he could see dynamics others could not. He saw repressed anger slipping out as jokes, saw unconscious seduction play out in glances, saw shadows being projected while people pretended to be sophisticated. To them, it was invisible. To him, it was blindingly obvious. That's the mirror effect. Your presence alone reflects unconsciousness back to people. They feel exposed, even if you never judge them. This often leads to quiet withdrawal. Friends stop calling, conversations dry up, people keep you at a distance. Not because you're wrong, but because your clarity feels threatening. This is why highly sensitive or deeply perceptive people often feel alienated. They see more, feel more, and others sense it, even if nothing is said. Jung's solution was not total withdrawal, but selective participation. He called it dosing exposure, limited contact, short engagements, and the creation of sacred spaces where he could be fully himself without compromise. This is crucial for you too. It's not about rejecting everyone, it's about balancing. Short exposure to unconscious environments, long recovery in conscious ones. Otherwise, you'll drown in loneliness or bitterness. Now we arrive at the heart of Jung's insight. Some relationships are not meant to survive your growth, and that is not tragedy, it's completion. He wrote in his journal during 1918, "Some connections were never real. They were agreements between false selves. When one mask falls, the relationship ends. Not as failure, but as fulfillment of its purpose." Think about it. How many of your relationships are built on roles, masks, unspoken agreements never to go too deep? These aren't genuine connections. They are survival strategies. When you become real, those bonds die. Not because you destroyed them, but because they were never alive to begin with. One of Jung's patients, Anna, faced this truth with her mother. She realized her mother never knew her true self, never tolerated her authenticity, never wanted consciousness. She mourned the fantasy for 2 years. Not the relationship itself, but the hope that it could be different. And once she released that fantasy, she could set boundaries and protect her wholeness. This is what you must understand. Endings are sacred. Letting go of a false bond is not selfish. It is an act of preservation. Even Jung's own break with Freud was this truth in action. Their collaboration was real, but their bond was built on Freud's need for loyalty. When Jung's independence grew too strong, Freud felt betrayed. Jung chose his soul over approval. The price was heavy, but the alternative was worse, betraying his own truth. Here's the framework Jung gives us. Some relationships must transform, some must end, and some will deepen. First, the ones that end. These are the projectors and guardians who refuse their own work. You can't save them without sacrificing yourself. Second, the ones that transform. These are unconscious people who don't sabotage your growth, but also don't share it. You can maintain limited contact, surface conversations, short visits, reduced expectations. Third, the ones that deepen. These are rare, but powerful. People who are also doing inner work. When two authentic selves meet, the bond is unlike anything you've known before. And finally, the new category. Conscious community. This is the support system you must actively build, because authenticity is rare. You can't walk this path alone. You need others who value depth, who won't ask you to shrink, who see your authenticity not as threat, but as invitation. The hardest pill to swallow is this. Most of your current relationships are in the first two categories. Few are the third, which means you'll need to create the fourth. Jung saw this truth in his own life. He built sanctuaries, not just solitary towers, but communities of conscious collaborators, students, colleagues, friends who valued truth over comfort. And that's what you must do too. Seek out conscious circles, because your growth cannot survive in isolation. But even after you build new conscious relationships, there's a trap that can destroy everything: inflation. This is when genuine growth gets hijacked by the ego. Suddenly, consciousness becomes superiority. You look at others as asleep, while you see yourself as awake. Instead of humility, you fall into elitism. Jung called this spiritual inflation, and he warned it could undo years of work. You've probably met someone like this. They've done the therapy, the meditation, the shadow work, and yet they carry themselves like prophets. Every conversation is a lecture. Every silence is judgment. They aren't connected. They're elevated, above, unreachable. Nietzsche's collapse was a tragic example. His deep insights morphed into grandiose self-identification. He signed letters with godlike names, lost his grounding, and ended in isolation. Jung himself fell into this trap briefly, until Emma, his wife, confronted him. "Carl, you've become insufferable," she said. Her honesty brought him back down. The antidote is simple but difficult. Humility. Beginner's mind. Service without recognition. Ordinary human contact. Jung himself later admitted, "The wisest thing I can say after a lifetime of work is, I don't know." That humility preserved his relationships, kept him human, and grounded his brilliance in compassion. So what does a conscious relationship actually look like? Jung and his closest collaborator, Marie-Louise von France, showed us. They disagreed constantly, challenged each other fiercely, but never collapsed into dependency or superiority. Their bond worked because neither needed the other to validate their existence. They chose connection as whole beings. Conscious relationships rest on four pillars. First, differentiation, knowing where you end and the other begins. Second, authentic revelation, showing up as your true self, not as a role. Third, shadow tolerance, holding each other's darkness without fear or fixing. Fourth, conscious conflict, fighting cleanly, not to win but to understand. When these four exist, relationships stop being cages and become mirrors of growth. They don't shrink you, they expand you. They don't drain you, they feed you. But here's the paradox. The more authentic you become, the fewer relationships you need. A single conscious friendship is more nourishing than 10 unconscious ones. Depth replaces quantity. That is the gift at the end of destruction. Your growth may tear away masks, roles, and illusions, but what remains is rare, real, and indestructible. Jung's final insight captures it best. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. The price is that fewer can meet you there. The wisdom is to accept that without bitterness. Let's pause and reflect. If your growth is shaking your relationships, you're not failing. You're experiencing individuation. Jung insisted that this process always begins in isolation because few people can tolerate authenticity when they've built their lives on masks. But individuation isn't about becoming a hermit. It's about learning to balance three realities. First, time with conscious community, where you can breathe fully as yourself. Second, time in ordinary life, where you interact with the unconscious world without losing yourself. Third, time alone, where you integrate everything and reconnect to your inner center. If you lean too far into solitude, you risk bitterness and detachment. If you immerse too much in unconscious circles, you risk regression. If you cling only to conscious communities, you risk spiritual elitism. Balance is the key. Jung himself walked this path, solitary in his tower, social in measured doses, and collaborative with those who could meet him at depth. So, if you feel torn between belonging and isolation, remember, the goal is not to escape the world, but to live in it without losing your soul. Now let's confront the grief, because growth doesn't just set you free, it breaks your heart. When Anna released the fantasy of a real relationship with her mother, she went through years of mourning. Not mourning what existed, but what never existed. She had to face the painful truth that the love she longed for wasn't possible because it was built on projection, not authenticity. This mourning is sacred. Jung warned that ungrieved relationships create psychic debris. If you don't process the loss, you carry it into every future bond. You compare new people to old fantasies. You cling to illusions, hoping someone new will heal the wound left by someone who never truly saw you. Grieving means acknowledging what was real, releasing what was fantasy, and honoring the ending. It doesn't mean cutting people off in rage. It means closing the cycle consciously, so you don't contaminate what comes next. Your growth will demand that you mourn, that you cry, rage, ache, that you let go, not with bitterness, but with reverence, because every false bond you release makes space for something true. Here lies the paradox. Your spiritual growth isolates you at first, but eventually it connects you more deeply than ever before. Unconscious relationships are built on fusion. I need you to complete me. Conscious ones are built on wholeness. I am complete, and so are you. We choose connection as two whole beings. This shift changes everything. Conflict stops being a threat and becomes an opportunity. Authenticity stops being dangerous and becomes a bridge. Shadow work stops being terrifying and becomes intimacy. Jung illustrated this through a patient who believed his marriage had failed. In truth, it had succeeded at its unconscious purpose. Both partners avoided wholeness by playing roles. When those roles collapsed, so did the marriage. But the man eventually entered a conscious partnership where both partners did their own inner work. Both tolerated each other's shadows, both used conflict as growth. That bond was more challenging, but also infinitely more nourishing. That's what conscious relationships demand. Courage to be fully yourself, and grace to let others be fully themselves. Few will accept that invitation, but those who do will create a kind of connection you've never known before. So how do you practice this in daily life? Start small. Jung recommended 3 practices. First, an authenticity audit. Every week, ask yourself, where did I perform instead of being real? What was I afraid of losing if I told the truth? Second, a boundary practice. Set one small but uncomfortable boundary every week. Notice who respects it and who resents it. That difference will reveal who is truly compatible with you. Third, community cultivation. Seek out conscious spaces, therapy groups, spiritual circles, communities where depth is honored over performance. These practices do 2 things. They reveal who in your current life can tolerate authenticity, and they guide you toward new connections that support it. Over time, the unconscious bonds fall away, the conscious ones deepen, and you stop begging the wrong people to see you. And slowly, you realize something radical. You don't need everyone to understand you. You just need a few who can truly meet you. Now let's face the most radical truth. Most people will choose comfort over consciousness. They will go back to sleep, cling to their masks, and resent you for waking up. Jung spent his life studying the rare few who did not. Those who chose authenticity over approval, truth over comfort, wholeness over masks. These individuals often lost friendships, faced rejection, endured loneliness. But they also discovered something priceless. They didn't just survive without unconscious relationships. They thrived with conscious ones. So if you're wondering why your circle is shrinking, why your family feels distant, why your friendships fade. Remember, this is not failure. This is the fire of individuation, burning away the false to reveal the real. Jung put it simply, your spiritual growth is destroying your relationships. Some must be destroyed. Some can transform. All will reveal whether they were ever real at all. And so we return to the beginning. Your family saying, you've changed. Your friends saying, you're distant. Your partner saying, you're not the person I married. They are right. You have changed. You are no longer playing the roles that kept everyone comfortable. You are no longer performing the mask that allowed others to remain asleep. You are becoming real. This is the privilege of individuation, but also its price. Fewer people will meet you at this depth. Many will leave. Some will resist. But the ones who remain and the ones you will meet will connect to you in ways that false roles never allowed. Your task is not to save every relationship. It's to honor the ones that end, nurture the ones that transform, and cherish the few that deepen. And above all, to keep choosing authenticity even when it costs you approval. Because at the end of this path lies something stronger than comfort, wholeness, something rarer than popularity, truth, and something more sacred than belonging, real connection. Jung warned that the journey of individuation feels like exile. At first, you'll believe you are losing everything. Family distances themselves, friendships fade, partners resist. It feels like abandonment. But what's truly happening is revelation. The people leaving were never relating to your authentic self. They were relating to your role, your performance, your willingness to stay small. When that mask falls, the illusion collapses. Their distance is not punishment. It's proof that they cannot meet you where you are going. This is why Jung compared individuation to death and rebirth. The false self dies, and with it the relationships that depended on it. Then, from the ashes, new life emerges, but only if you are willing to endure the void. Too many retreat here. They feel the loneliness and run back to the old roles. They shrink themselves to fit again just to regain connection. But Jung's warning is clear. If you return to false fusion, you abandon your soul. The price of staying asleep is far higher than the pain of awakening. So when people drift away, don't chase them. Don't beg them to return to a bond that was never real. Instead, trust the process. What is leaving was never meant to stay. What is coming will be worth every loss. Let's talk about the space between endings and beginnings. The wilderness. This is the stage Jung described as unbearable solitude. After the old roles collapse, the new connections have not yet formed. You stand in between worlds, no longer who you were, not yet who you are becoming. This is the desert of transformation. In this space, you will be tempted to numb yourself, to fill the silence with distraction, to rush back to comfort, to cling to anyone who offers temporary relief. But Jung insisted this is sacred ground. The wilderness is where you meet yourself without masks. It's where you hear the voice of your soul without interference. Modern psychology confirms this. People who endure transitional solitude often emerge with deeper self-awareness, stronger boundaries, and greater clarity about the relationships they actually want. The wilderness is not punishment, it's preparation. So if you feel abandoned, lost, or invisible right now, understand. This is the exact place transformation requires you to be. Don't run from it. Walk through it. Because what waits on the other side is the kind of connection you've always longed for, but never thought possible. But how do you survive the wilderness without collapsing? Jung gives us the key: ritual. Ritual doesn't have to be religious. It's the conscious act of creating meaning in the void. Jung himself built a stone tower where he painted, carved, and meditated. It wasn't escape. It was a sacred container to hold his transformation. For you, ritual might be journaling daily, walking in silence, lighting a candle before reflection, or marking the end of a relationship with a symbolic act of release. Ritual reminds your psyche that the loss is not chaos, but initiation. Because here's the truth. Endings without ritual feel like destruction. Endings with ritual feel like rebirth. Jung knew that the unconscious demands symbols to process transformation. Without them, grief stagnates. With them, grief becomes fuel for growth. So instead of just enduring the wilderness, sanctify it. Make your solitude meaningful. Create spaces, gestures, and practices that remind you, this is not death. This is metamorphosis. Now let's return to the danger of inflation, because the wilderness also tempts the ego. When you awaken, it's easy to believe you see more clearly than others, and perhaps you do. But clarity without humility becomes arrogance, and arrogance destroys the very connections you're meant to create. Jung himself nearly lost everything to this trap. In his early years of transformation, he spoke as if he were above ordinary people. His family felt alienated. His colleagues whispered he was unbearable. It was Emma, his wife, who told him the truth. "Carl, your insights are real, but you're using them to elevate yourself instead of connect." That confrontation saved him. It reminded him that the purpose of growth is not superiority, it's service. True consciousness humbles you, because the more you see, the more you realize how much remains unseen. So beware. If you feel contempt for those who haven't awakened, if you dismiss ordinary people as beneath you, you've slipped into inflation. And inflation isolates you more brutally than any unconscious relationship ever could. Stay grounded, stay humble, stay human. That's the only way your growth becomes a gift instead of a curse. What does it look like to stay humble? It looks like practicing beginner's mind, approaching every moment as if there's more to learn. It looks like serving without recognition, helping others in ways no one sees. It looks like maintaining ordinary relationships with neighbors, co-workers, strangers, without needing them to be conscious for you to show kindness. This is what Jung modeled in his later years. Despite his fame, he spent hours gardening, fishing, walking in nature. He welcomed challenges to his ideas without defensiveness. He admitted ignorance freely. He lived as a man, not as a prophet. And here's the paradox. The more he humbled himself, the deeper his influence became. Because true wisdom doesn't separate, it connects. True growth doesn't elevate, it grounds. So if you want to know whether your growth is authentic, ask yourself, does it make me more human, more compassionate, more grounded? Or does it make me superior, isolated, bitter? The answer will reveal whether you're walking the path of individuation or the trap of inflation. At this point, you might be asking, what's the end game? If growth destroys, isolates, and humbles, what's the reward? The answer is simple: conscious connection. Relationships unlike anything you've ever known. Imagine this: a friendship where you don't have to hide, where your boundaries are respected, where your growth isn't a threat but an inspiration. A partnership where conflict deepens intimacy instead of tearing it apart. A family connection where authenticity is valued over roles. These are rare, but they are real. Jung called this the community of the conscious, a small circle, often just a handful of people, but profound in depth. Within it, you can be fully yourself and be fully received. And here's the gift. Once you taste this, you'll never settle again. You won't trade authenticity for approval or shrink yourself for belonging. You'll accept fewer relationships, but those you keep will nourish your soul in ways the old ones never could. This is the true reward of individuation, not just knowing yourself, but finding others who meet you there. But conscious relationships don't just appear, they require cultivation. Jung taught that consciousness attracts consciousness, but only when you dare to show up authentically. If you keep performing, you'll keep attracting performers. If you reveal yourself, you'll attract those who are real. That's why vulnerability is the doorway. When you risk honesty, sharing your fears, your struggles, your truths, you filter your circle. The unconscious will retreat, unable to handle it. The conscious will lean in, grateful to meet someone who finally speaks the language of depth. This is the painful gift of individuation. It forces you to risk rejection in order to find real connection. You can't fake your way into conscious community. You can only arrive by being fully yourself. And yes, most people will walk away. But the few who remain, they will be the ones you've been waiting for your whole life. So practice vulnerability. Speak honestly, even if your voice shakes. That trembling is the bridge between solitude and conscious connection. Now, let's face another shadow: anger. Many people on this path feel furious at those who reject them, furious at family who won't understand, at friends who disappear, at partners who resist. Jung warned against suppressing this anger, but also against misdirecting it. The truth is, they are not villains. They are unconscious. They're clinging to safety the only way they know how. Your growth threatens them, but not because they hate you, because they can't face themselves. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it reframes your rage. The target of your anger is not them. It's the system of unconsciousness itself. It's the prison of roles, projections, and illusions that hold people hostage. So use the anger as fuel, not as poison. Let it give you courage to set boundaries, to walk away, to keep growing. But don't let it harden your heart. Consciousness requires compassion, even for those who can't meet you. Compassion, however, doesn't mean compromise. Jung was clear. Never betray yourself to preserve someone else's comfort. The moment you do, you regress. This is the choice every seeker faces. Will you shrink to keep the bond, or will you risk the bond to remain authentic? Most people choose the former. That's why consciousness is rare. But the few who choose authenticity discover freedom no relationship can replace. Jung himself made this choice again and again, with colleagues, with friends, even with Freud. Each time, he chose truth over approval. Each time it cost him dearly, but each time it expanded his soul. So remember, the price of authenticity is high, but the price of self-betrayal is higher. One destroys illusions, the other destroys your soul. Let's step into the paradox of conscious love. It isn't easy, romanticized, or free of conflict. In fact, it demands more of you than any unconscious bond ever did. Why? Because conscious love requires that you bring your whole self. That means revealing not just your light, but your shadow. It means tolerating the other's darkness without fleeing or fixing. It means fighting cleanly, naming your truth, taking responsibility for your triggers, seeking understanding instead of victory. This isn't the fairy tale of perfect harmony. It's the reality of two whole beings choosing each other again and again, even when it's hard. And paradoxically, this makes love deeper, not weaker. Because when you survive conscious conflict, intimacy grows. So if your relationships feel more turbulent after awakening, don't panic. That turbulence is the sign you're no longer playing roles. You're meeting reality. And real love is born in reality, not illusion. Jung often reminded his patients, the goal of individuation is not perfection but wholeness. That means embracing contradictions. You can be wise and foolish, strong and weak, conscious and unconscious. To demand purity is to deny humanity. Applied to relationships, this means you won't always be the conscious one. Sometimes you'll regress, project, or avoid. Sometimes your partner or friend will be the mirror, reflecting what you don't want to see. Conscious bonds don't eliminate struggle. They transform it into growth. The transcendent function, Jung's great insight, is the ability to hold opposites without collapsing them. In love, this means you can hold conflict without splitting. You can remain connected while being different. You can love without fusing and separate without abandoning. This is the alchemy of conscious relationship, not the death of conflict, but the transformation of conflict into intimacy. But here's the trap. Even conscious seekers sometimes turn against each other. They use psychological language as weapons, diagnosing instead of relating, analyzing instead of listening. Jung warned against this intellectualization. True connection is not built on theories, it's built on presence. So be careful. Don't turn your growth into a shield against vulnerability. Don't hide behind concepts when what's needed is tenderness. Consciousness is not about always being right. It's about being real. Sometimes the most conscious act is not analysis, but silence. Not explanation, but holding someone's hand. Not naming the shadow, but sharing the pain. Consciousness is lived, not just spoken. Remember this: wisdom without love hardens into pride. Love without wisdom collapses into chaos. But together they form the balance that sustains conscious connection. Now let's return to the core. Individuation is both privilege and burden. The privilege is discovering who you are. The burden is losing who you were to others. Your old roles die. Your masks fall. People grieve the version of you that kept them safe. And you grieve too. Not just relationships, but identities. The caretaker, the loyal friend, the dutiful child, the perfect partner. When they die, it feels like you're dying too. But Jung's promise is this: the death of the false self is the birth of the real one. And the birth of the real self creates the possibility of real love. Not the love of illusion, but the love of truth. So yes, you will lose much. But what you gain is beyond comparison. Freedom, wholeness, authenticity, and the rare experience of being seen, not for your role, not for your mask, but for your soul. As we near the end, let's imagine your future. Picture yourself surrounded not by many, but by a few. A handful of people who know you as you are. With them, you laugh freely, argue honestly, cry without shame. They don't complete you, they accompany you. They don't demand you shrink, they celebrate your expansion. This is the reward Jung spoke of. Conscious community, rare, small, but unshakable. These bonds won't protect you from pain, but they will carry you through it. They won't erase conflict, but they will deepen intimacy. They won't guarantee permanence, but they will offer truth. And in that truth, you will feel something you've been chasing your whole life. Belonging without betrayal. Connection without compromise. Love without illusion. That is the promise of individuation fulfilled. But there's one final warning. Do not idolize consciousness itself. Do not make individuation a new religion, a new mask, a new way of hiding. Jung saw many seekers fall here. They turned growth into performance, spirituality into status, truth into another costume. The point of individuation is not to become enlightened in the eyes of others. It's to live honestly with yourself. Some days you'll succeed, some days you'll fail. Both are part of the journey. So drop the pressure to be the awakened one. Drop the performance of depth. Live simply, live fully, live real. That is all individuation ever asked of you. And so, we arrive at the end. Or rather, the beginning. Your spiritual growth will destroy your relationships. Some will crumble because they were built on illusion. Some will resist and force you to choose. Some will transform and deepen. And a few will emerge, new and rare, born from authenticity. This is not failure. This is the path. The price of becoming who you truly are is losing who others need you to be. But the reward is discovering who will walk beside you when you no longer wear a mask. Jung left us with this wisdom. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. The price is that fewer can meet you there. The wisdom is to accept that without bitterness. So as you walk forward, remember, don't cling to what's leaving. Don't fear the wilderness. Don't fall into superiority. And above all, don't betray yourself. Because what waits beyond the destruction is worth everything you've lost. Wholeness, freedom, and the kind of love that can only exist between two souls who are fully awake.